Well, good morning and welcome to worship at Grace Bible Church. We're glad you're here with us this morning. If you were in here for the video, you heard one of our songs that we'll be singing this morning. I have just been so touched by the words of music. And so a lot of times, if you don't know the songs, just listen to the words because you can't help but not be touched by that. And our goal when we get together on a Sunday morning is to corporately pray and praise and worship and learn. And so part of our being here this morning is a responsibility. It's a response on our part. I want to share a verse from Hebrews 13:15. Through him, therefore, let us constantly and at all times offer up to God a sacrifice of praise, which is the fruit of lips that thankfully acknowledge and confess and glorify his name. Let's stand and worship together.
Now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad, let the people of God sing his praise all over the land. Everyone in the valley, come and lift your voice. All those on the mountains top, be glad and shout for joy. Rise up and praise him, he deserves our love. Rise up and praise him, worship the Holy One with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Rise up and praise him, let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad, let the people of God sing his praise all over the land. joy. Rise up and praise Him. He deserves our love. Rise up and praise Him. Worship the Holy One with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Rise up and praise Him. Rise up and praise Him. Rise up and praise Him. The head that once was crowned with thorns is crowned with glory now. The Savior knelt to wash our feet. Now at His feet we bow. The one who bore our sin and shame, now robed in majesty. The radiance of perfect love now shines for all to see. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. The fear that held us now gives way to Him who is our peace. His final breath upon the cross is now alive in me. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name your word. Jesus, you have taken hold of me. All my life is in your hands. You are my strength. You are my strength. I will look up, for there is none above you. I will bow down to tell you that I need you, Jesus, Lord of all. I
Forgive me if I sound like a person of privilege, but there are times when I feel like I'm hungry for something and I go to the refrigerator or to the cupboards and I'll look through there and I'll open them up and it'll be loaded with food and I'll just like say, there's nothing here that we don't have anything to eat, you know. As a parent, when your kids say that to you, you kind of give them the lesson about people starving in other parts of the world. You should be thankful for what you have. We have something here God has provided and be good about it. But there are times when I go to the refrigerator, I go to the cabinets, the cupboards, and I look inside there and I said, there's nothing I want to eat, or I don't know what it is that's going to satisfy me, but everything I see doesn't look like it, you know. And there are times when I know exactly what I want. Even before I get there, I know what I'm looking for. How many of you can relate? Oh, okay, all right, good. I'm not the only one who's privileged here. Then there are times you know you want something and you're just not sure, so you say, let me see what the options are. And once you look in it and you say, that's it, that's what I want. You know? And so there are those times too. And so in the weariness of life, sometimes we don't know what we need to satisfy that thirst of our soul. And so I want to encourage us this morning here that we want to let God be the one who satisfies the longing of our souls in the weariness of life. Let God be the one who satisfies the longing of our souls in the weariness of life. Turn with me to Psalm chapter 63. We're going to be in the book of Psalms, Psalm 63. This morning, and yeah, that little map you can kind of put back up there, Tori. Yeah, is that the first slide? Okay, so let me read through the passage then, and then we'll get to that slide. Okay, Psalm 63. It's a Psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. Psalm 63. Please read along with me or follow along with me. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. This is the word of the Lord. So the superscript of this psalm says it's a psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. And so when we think about that, normally we think about the wilderness. We think about David, we think about when he was running from King Saul. He was on the run from him. But this actually takes place, I believe, in the time when he's running from Absalom. When Absalom conspires against him and goes and tries to take over the kingdom there, David has to leave, and he has to leave with some of his people, and he goes out to a place running, going across the river, and he goes to Mahanaim, which was on that slide there. Tori, if you can give us that map, that little map there. Thank you. Well, we got going too fast. Okay. There we go. So you can see the little red arrow there, and that shows from Jerusalem. That's an older map, but it's from Jerusalem is where the arrow starts, and where it points to is where David went. It's probably about a place 50 miles away from Jerusalem. And he was on the run there, and when you think about it, we're going to talk a little bit about how he got to that place and why he was running, and to give us that context. But if you think about the idea of the wilderness or the idea of desert, you see that there's a history of that with God and his people. If you think about the Israelites when they come out of Egypt and they are supposed to go into the promised land, and then they don't do that because they don't have enough faith, and then they wander in the wilderness. We have that history here in the scriptures. And then you have David, like I said, you have a couple of times there when he's running from Saul and when he's running from his son Absalom. And then you have Jesus going into the wilderness as well in the New Testament. Right after he's baptized, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness where he goes there and he faces the tempter there, and he resists and refutes Satan at that time and begins his ministry after that. And so when you think about the wilderness is a place where you gain perspective. It's the idea of battling self-reliance, because a lot of times we just want to do what we want. We want to depend upon ourselves. The wilderness gives you some perspective on that. We become reoriented to who God is, to his faithfulness. When we see him watch over us in those kinds of times, we become more aware of his timing, his power to do the things that he promises to do and taking care of us. And we experience those things in a different kind of way when we are in a context of life we would call the wilderness. Times when we're kind of wondering, we look and we not quite sure what's happening. The perspective is not as clear as it can be or should be, and so we gain perspective in that time. We're reminded that God is who he is, and even as we go through the hardships of those times, where we maybe question that, God helps us to see that in time. And so David was in a place like that when he wrote this psalm. So I want to go back to this idea of Absalom and his conspiracy, or his coup attempt, I guess I should say. And so if you know anything about David and his house, you know that he has this history of things that happened once he defiles himself or sins with Bathsheba and that whole scene with Uriah. That's David's great sin, one of his great sins. That's the one we seem to know about the most, it seems like. And so there were some things that were going to happen in his house or in his home because of the results or consequences of that, if I should say like that. And so we know that he had multiple wives and he had children from these different wives. And on one occasion, there was one of his sons there who saw one of his half-sisters and raped her. And that was Absalom's sister. So if you know, that was Amnon and his half-sister Tamar, and then Tamar's brother is Absalom. And so Absalom set up and ended up killing his brother Amnon because he was so upset about that. David didn't really do anything in that instance, even though he knew about it. And so afterwards, Absalom had to go and run away because once he killed his brother, Absalom thought, David's going to come after me. So he runs and he stays away for a number of years, and then he's called back. David allows him to come back. Absalom asks his friend, one of David's generals, and asks him to let him come back. And so Absalom is able to come back into Jerusalem, but David never sees him for the 2 years that he's there when he comes back. And so while he's there, Absalom begins to try to win the hearts of the people over. And so in the morning time, he gets out real early and he has some people with him and he sets up a place. And when people come to go and see and to inquire of things and come into Jerusalem, he would be right there and he'd say, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you." You know? And he'd say, "Where are you from?" "Oh, yeah, you're from this part or this area of Israel, and yeah, you're from that area. But you know, unfortunately, there's not anyone here who really is in good with the king from your area. And you know, if I were king, it would be different, you know." And so he developed. It says that he won the hearts of the people. And so they would come and they would see Absalom, and he would do this. And after a while, he would stick out his hand and they would kiss his hand like he was the king, you know. And so he was conspiring there. His mindset was that he wanted to take over and become the king, and he was going to get rid of his dad. And so he ends up doing that. He goes, instead of Jerusalem, he goes down to Hebron, and he brings some people with him, and they're declaring him as king, you know. And so when he does that, David has to leave. He has to run. He takes a few people with him, and he even leaves the Ark of the Covenant there with the priests, and he says, you know, I know God will take care of me. I got to go. And he's really depressed. His son is trying to kill him. You know, he's trying to take over the kingdom. And so he runs out, and if you know, Absalom takes some of David's his men, and he brings some of David's wise counselors there too. And there's one, his name is Ahithophel, and he gives Absalom some counsel there. And there's another counselor that David has who comes in and says, well, I don't think you should do that. You know how David is. He's a man of war. He knows what you're going to do. So that's not a good course of action there. And that actually ends up saving David. And so Absalom chooses the wrong counsel, if you will. And in doing so, David is able to escape, and he ends up going after Absalom, or sending his armies after him. But even with all of that, even though Absalom wants to destroy David, David doesn't want him to be harmed. But you know that Joab ends up doing that. They capture Absalom, who had beautiful, wonderful hair, unlike mine. And so he got caught up in a tree by his hair, and they captured him and ended up running him through there. So while David was on the run, he's running out and he's going out to the wilderness. He goes out to the desert to get away. And while he's out there, he writes this psalm. And so that's the context of where we see this, just to place it in there so that we kind of understand what's going on in his mind, to be able to try to figure out why he says what he says there. And so he writes this psalm. And he starts off and he says, "Oh God, you are my God." So he's in this wilderness. I'm going to click a few of these here. Let's see. Yes, our first point. He says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you, my soul thirsts for you." So we're talking about letting God satisfy the longings of our souls in the weariness of life. We're talking about the idea of recognizing who God is and what he is to us. And so this first point is that the Lord is the prize that we desire. The Lord is the prize that we desire. David says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you." Some of the old translations say, "I will seek you," or "early I seek you." And the idea there is that when you get up in the morning, early in the morning to do something, it's because you have great intentionality as to what you're doing. You want to make sure you get it done. And so it's translated earnestly in some of our newer translations. "Oh God, you are my God." So David declares God as his own God. He says, "Earnestly I seek you." And he says, "My soul thirsts for you." So this is the idea where I got the idea of when we have some longings within us. God gives us appetites. He gives us desires for different kinds of food and things like that. And that's to help us to understand that on the spiritual level, we have a desire as well. We have some appetites that need to be filled, and God is the only one who can fill them. There was a French philosopher who said that, our hearts have a hole that is in the shape of God. Only God can fill that. And so that's the idea behind that we have some desires, we have some appetites, spiritual appetites that can only be filled by God. So David says this. He says, "My soul thirsts for you." He says, "My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land." And so you see the idea of soul and you see the idea of flesh. It's his whole person. And we try to separate those things sometimes, but the idea is we're talking about his whole being is desiring after God, is needing God. And he says that he's in a dry and weary land where there is no water. There's no water, there's no life, there's no refreshment. A weary land for them would be like there's no righteousness. They're just out in the middle of nowhere. David, as he's there, he has this idea about seeking after God. He says, earnestly I will seek you. But he says, so have I looked upon you in the sanctuary in verse 2. So the idea there is that the same sort of fervor and intentionality he has right now is the same sort of idea he's had in times past, gone into to the worship of God before. And so he says, so have I looked upon you in the sanctuary. And in doing so, he's remembering, beholding your power and your glory. You remember they worshiped where the Ark of the Covenant was. The temple's not built yet at this time. So they worship where the Ark of the Covenant is, and that's where the mercy seat of God is. That's where the glory of God resides. And so David says, here, I remember being there, and I beheld your power and your glory. And so he's reminded of the things that God has done in the past. He's reminded of God's power where he is. And so David, beholding God in that sense, he gets a glimpse of who God is. He remembers those times, and he thinks about it where he is right now, and it's giving him power for what he has to face in the future. It's giving him perspective. And so he says, so have I looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. He says, because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. That's kind of a wild thing to say, because the whole thing about God is he's the one who saves us. He's the one who delivers us. And David is at this point in his life, in his feelings, if you will. He says, because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So he says, it's kind of like to try to understand that verse, I don't know if I do a good job with it or not, but my idea is that you feel like you're in a place where all is good. And you said, if I died right now, it'd be just fine. Because everything is going well. Because I know who God is. I'm walking closely with him. I'm enjoying that fellowship with you, God. And so even if I died, that would be just fine. Because your steadfast love is better than life. And then he says that, in saying that, he says, I'll praise you. My lips will praise you. I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. And so he's talking about his worship. It's not just that he has this desire within his heart, but that it has to be expressed some way. And it's expressed in the full person here. He says, I will bless you as long as with my lips, I will praise you. And I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. And so his focus is all directed towards God. And that's the praise that it's on his lips is towards God. The lifting up of his hands points to God. That's his focus on God. And it also reminds us that, when people lift up their hands, the idea in that is that there's also an understanding that our help comes from God. We're asking God to help us. And so David says, this is what I'm about. It's everything. My complete focus is going to be on God. And he says this because he says, I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hand. So it's something where he is now. He recognizes what he's experienced before in the sanctuary, if you will, but he realized he doesn't have to be enclosed in the four walls in order to worship God. And so he's looking out and he's saying, do that now. Of course, he'll do that when he gets back there, and he's got this hope that God will return him back to Jerusalem. And so he's got this understanding that God is the prize. God is what he really desires. And so he wants to give back to God what is rightly his, and that is what God is deserving of, and that is his worship, his very being. It's what his whole life is about. So when you think about it, sometimes we look at it and we say, what do I get when I come into church on Sunday? What am I going to get? I didn't get fed this week. It wasn't really a lively worship. It didn't really minister to me. And so sometimes that's the people come with that idea. But really the idea is that we're supposed to give to God what is rightly his. what he is deserving of. And so David, in this psalm, says, hey, even when I'm in the wilderness, even where I am, I know that you are faithful. I think about your steadfast love, and it's better than life to me. I'm going to praise you. I'm going to lift up my hands to you. You are the prize. You are what I thought maybe I was seeking for myself. I realized that God is what I'm really looking for. Kind of like when you open up the cupboard and you're not sure what you're looking for, but then you see it and you say, that's it. I know that's what I want. That's the idea here. And so he says, thinking about the Lord being our prize, the next point is that the Lord is the peace that we need. He's the prize that we desire. He's the peace that we need. So continuing on, David says here, my soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food. So when you think about when you eat and you have fat and rich food, it's got all the cream, all the ice cream, all the heavy things that you can put in there that satisfy. David says that his soul is satisfied with God, as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips, he says. When I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the night watches, or the watches of the night. And so when David is doing this, when you think about the watches of the night, he's lying down trying to go to sleep, but he's having a hard time. So the watches of the night is the idea in the nighttime when it goes by so slowly, and you're like, oh man, and I'm not getting to sleep, and I wish it were over. I wish I'd be asleep and wake up. It's the idea, it's like a watch in the night. So, Jermaine is recovering from her shoulder surgery, and so she doesn't sleep so well. And so she gets up in the middle of the night there, and then she has a hard time getting back to sleep, and I get up with her sometimes. She doesn't sleep in the same room with me. She's out. I kicked her out to the living room where she could sleep better because I'm so kind, right? And so I get up and kind of check on her because I sleep with one eye open when thinking about her now. And so I go out there to see her, and I'm really tired, sometimes. And so I went there, and, she's not sleeping so well, and she's not comfortable. So I just kind of sit with her for a little bit and prop up the pillows, try to help her to get comfortable. And I'm just really, honestly, and I told her, I said, I want you to be comfortable. I'm really trying to get you where you need to be and everything. But I really want to go back to bed, too. Those night watches, And so I say that because that's where you are, You just wish it would be over, and it feels like it's going on for a long time. And David, being in the situation he's in, he feels like that as well. He says, "For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy." And so as he's thinking about that, he's thinking about the nighttime, and those night watches in the night, and you can use night as a symbol there as well. But the idea is, when you think that it's something that's bad that's coming, he says, look, the darkness is there because God is protecting you with his wings. And so it's a beautiful picture there of God providing peace, providing protection in that. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. David declares here in verse 8, my soul clings to you, he says, and your right hand upholds me. And so as you think about it, he's like, I'm holding on to you, God. I'm trusting in you. I got nothing else to hold on to. I'm holding on to you. But the truth of the matter is, your right hand upholds me. So the confidence is not so much in him holding on to God. It's the idea that God is holding on to him. God is holding on to us. And it's not just holding on, it's holding on with his right hand, which is the place of strength, right? So David says that he declares this, and so even though he's clinging to God, God is upholding him. So you remember, he's in the desert, he's on the run, his son wants to kill him. And yet he's still trusting God, and he knows that God is going to take care of him. It didn't mean he didn't leave. It didn't mean that he didn't run, because that's where he is. He's on the run now. But he continues to trust in God that somehow or another God is going to work through all of this. And so instead of trying to figure it out for himself, he says, I'm going to trust you, Lord. And in doing so, he finds this satisfaction for his soul in this time of weariness in his life. So the Lord is the peace we need. The Lord is the prize that we desire. Finally, the Lord is the protector on whom we depend. The Lord is the protector on whom we depend. David says, but those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. So in saying this, and I had asked or talked to you a little bit at the beginning and said that, how do you get that this is, David being the king and running from Absalom? This verse in particular really points it out in verse 11. He's not just using that word as the king as he's not obviously not talking about Saul, because David knows that he's not going to mess with anything with Saul. You remember whenever David dealt with Saul, he had a couple of times he could have taken him out, and he didn't do that. He said, I'm not going to raise my hand to the Lord's anointed. But he says, but the king shall rejoice. You're going to watch over me. Those who seek to destroy my life, he says in verse 9, but the king shall rejoice in God. He's talking about himself. And not only is he talking about himself, just in the idea that, okay, God watches over the king, me, but he reminds himself of the calling that God has given to him on his life, that he is the one who's been anointed king. And because he is God's anointed, God will watch over him. So he says, but the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. The people who seek to destroy his life, he said, they're going to get killed. They're going to go down to the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. And in 2 Samuel chapter 18, this is what happens to Absalom. He gets killed there. And then they talk about all the other people that were with him and how many died by the sword. So David, in trusting in God, knows that God will take care of him. Verse 11, he says, but the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. When people who are not going through hard times see other people going through hard times, sometimes you can judge those people. You can say, oh, you're going through the hard time because you did this or that. This is God's punishment on you. You're guilty for this. And in David's case, he has some history of not taking care of things in his household. He's got the Bathsheba deal there and Uriah. And so later on, he does the census, and God punishes Israel because of that, or disciplines David in that regard. And so you can look at it and say, hey, you did something wrong, or you're messed up. And sometimes we want to talk about other people like that. It's not the way we're supposed to do it, but sometimes we look at those things and we for some reason or another, I guess because it's not happening to me, that I think it's okay to talk about somebody else and maybe celebrate it a little bit. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. When I was in high school, I remember playing basketball, and the coach was giving some instruction to one of my teammates there. And so when he was telling him what to do on like how to set a pick, let's say it was something like that. And so he was giving him instruction on how to do that. And I remember kind of mouthing off and saying, yeah, do it that way, And then the coach said, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're doing either. And then he turned it on me, and he came on me twice as hard. And that's what happens to us, right? Sometimes you want to point the finger at somebody else and you laugh at them and everything. Until it turns on you, then it's not fun. And there's stuff that comes down on us that we don't like. So in this psalm here, it's the idea that there is a weariness, there is a struggle, there's a dryness, and David is out in all of that. And he's not quite clear as to what God is doing in all of this, but he knows who God is. He declares his trust in God. And in doing so, he just relies on God to deliver. He's satisfied with what God is doing because he knows who God is. For us, we go through things in life. I know the hardships come, and they come in different kinds of ways, and we feel like it takes a while to process those things. Sometimes we just say, hey, get over it, suck it up. Just deal with it. That's what I had to do. I don't have time to care about anything that's going on in my life because I'm too busy just trying to make ends meet or whatever it is. But there's a process in things. And sometimes we want an instantaneous type of deal. And it takes us that time to process through things. But I want you to know that the encouragement today is that we want to let God be the one who satisfies those longings of our souls in the weariness of life. When we go to the cupboard, the spiritual cupboard, and we say, I don't want this, I don't want that. Sometimes the thing that you think you don't want, all of a sudden you sit down and you eat it, and it's like, man, that really hit the spot. That's exactly what I needed. But you were reluctant to go there because you thought you wanted something a little bit different. And so it's like that sometimes when we feel the weariness of life. We get going, and sometimes you say, hey, what do I need to do? I know what I need to do. I just need a break. I just need to go on a short little vacation somewhere. And I'm not saying those things are bad. Sometimes you do need that to gain some perspective. Sometimes you say, I just need to sit down and watch a Hallmark movie, or whatever it is, and that will kind of give me perspective, and it'll be relaxing, or it'll satisfy me. Sometimes you don't know what it is. You go out to the shed or to the garage and you start fiddling around with something and you say, well, I know I got this to do, and at least you can do that. Rick Warren had given pastors, if you know Rick Warren, he's a celebrated pastor in our country, and he had given pastors encouragement. He says, when you don't know what to do and you feel weary or a little bit, you know what you do? You go to your file cabinet and you start organizing your file cabinet. You start taking stuff out, papers you don't need, getting rid of them, things that you need, and you'll feel better about your file cabinet when you're done. At the very least, you got some positive something there, right? But the idea is that we want to make sure we're turning to God, and He may not have an answer that we're satisfied with right at that moment, but our continued trust in Him, He will satisfy the longing of our souls in the weariness of life. So trust in Him.